In the game of Survivor, there are many questions. Who are the good guys? Who are the bad guys? And who has the best story? That's the mission of the Survivor storytellers. It's what they do.
Welcome to the third iteration of the Survivor Storytellers. Before I get into a little story about that, want to welcome Tiki. Tiki and I were the original starters of the Survivor Storytellers like 5 seasons ago at this point. And we've jumped from one channel to another, and now we're here. So
maybe this one will get more than 1 or 2 views per video, Casey. Who knows?
Yeah, hopefully. And the funny thing is, we weren't even going to.
The fact of the matter is that the Survivor podcast scene is just way too oversaturated, even though we're trying to do something different with it.
Yeah. And I mean, this season, we weren't even going to do the podcast, but this season has been so fantastic. Let's just give ourselves like 5 minutes to just talk about this season before we actually get into the story aspect of it. So actually, for those who are first-time listeners, so Tiki and I were talking about doing a Survivor podcast like years ago, and we decided that what's something original that we could do, and it would be about breaking down the story, the archetypes, and the edit of Survivor, as opposed to just talking about strategy. So what's your thoughts on this season, Tiki?
This season has been the worst season since Island of the Idols. No, I'm just kidding. I love this season. I mean, like, again, I still have to see how exactly the season plays out before I rank it above 42. You know me, I'm a huge defender of 42. I love that season. I love all the arcs. I love the characters on that season. But so far, I think through to the merge, I think we are about on par, if not probably a little bit better than 42. Obviously, the 90-minute episodes have a lot to do with that, obviously. But also, Casey, and the reason why this is resonating with me more than a lot of the other casts that we've gotten in the new era is much like 42. I really feel like whether it's editing or the cast just clicking well or a combination of the two things, I genuinely feel like there are no duds in this cast. Not a single one. I genuinely feel like every single person in this cast down the line, besides maybe Brando, had something to contribute to the show. Sorry, Brando. Sorry, you seemed like a nice kid, but you were kind of a nothing character. But yeah, man, I am loving this. I think we've got just such a great eclectic mix of personalities. I mean, we got Napoleon Dynamite playing Survivor, Casey. Who would have ever thought that?
I know. And you know, I gotta say, I mean, I agree with everything you're saying, except I actually think this is, even though we're not done the season, this is the best season in the new era. And hell, I might even argue it's probably shaping up to be the best season since David versus Goliath.
We're on track for that for sure. Yeah.
Like this season, I mean, that's the thing. I don't really think there are any, duds of characters. Even Brando brings little sparks of light, but also he was the first non-Lulu vote out,
That's true.
But sometimes you don't get a ton of an early character. But like
I've just seen his archetype way too many times. That was my problem with him.
Which we'll dive into archetypes in a minute, but I actually have to say, I actually don't really think we are getting the standard archetypes like we've gotten in the prior seasons.
Not really.
Even someone like Drew, who was painted out to be the superfan archetype, is not the superfan archetype, which once again, we'll get into archetypes in a minute. But I just have to say, I'm loving this season. From the very first episode, I knew how well this season was going to shape up, which a lot of people were super critical on the first episode about how trash it was. The unfortunate outcome is not necessarily Survivor's fault. But even so, that episode was great, aside from the anticlimactic end. But totally. every single thing that we have had issues with in 41, 42, 43, and 44, they have fixed in this season.
I could still do without the Earn the Merge.
I actually like the Earn the Merge.
Do you? Have you grown to like it?
I actually liked it from the beginning, and I mean, hell,
really?
without getting too far into it, that's kind of like That's like how I like even in my game in Prometheus, sort of like you kind of have to earn your spot into day two. You have to earn your spot
Right,
into the
right. I
final
feel that.
three.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
kind of like
Right,
it.
right,
I just
right.
sort of wish I'm not a huge fan of randomness. I do kind of like people picking. You pick
I
based
hear
on
that. I hear
your
that.
your
Yeah.
strengths. But anyway, enough about that. Let's actually get into, we've already started talking about it, the archetypes. So let's talk about the
Mhm.
archetypes for this season before we actually get into the individual character edits.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I mean, like you said, Casey, I think the interesting thing about the archetypes this season is that, like, on paper, we certainly have them. Like, Drew is certainly on paper the nerd archetype for the season. Um, let's see, even someone like Kendra, who was really sticking out to me, especially these past couple. I mean, she is like, Kendra is like I feel like she's going for the Eliza Orlins like tribal council reaction crown right now. And she, basically, I feel like if it was a lot of other seasons, she'd just basically be edited as like, oh, okay, she's just kind of a middle of the road female player. But no, like they are really basically what I think this season is doing with the edit that I think is really refreshing is that they are genuinely letting these people's personalities like flourish in a way. And again, I think the 90-minute episodes are a big part of that. For example, we would have never seen the D big toe scene if not for the 90-minute episodes,
Yeah.
just stuff like that, and I mentioned this before. I actually mentioned this to you, when we were prepping for this, but like even someone like Austin, who was probably the person that I was maybe the most cold on just because it's like, oh God, it's just another golden boy and he's got all the advantages and that's all he ever talks about. But this whole sandwich arc, Casey, this whole sandwich arc, I
Yeah.
almost feel like the editors like intentionally made him talk about nothing but advantages so that come the merge, they could flip it and then talk about nothing but sandwiches. And I love
Yeah.
if that was an intentional editing choice, I love it. We got Bruce, Casey, who would have thought that Bruce was like arguably a bigger character than Jam Jam or Carolyn? I mean, who would have thought?
That's the thing. It's just like you can pick up those little hints of these archetypes like the golden boy, like the super fan, but once again, it's like if anything, it was teased right there in the beginning. But this is the interesting thing. I don't necessarily see these archetypes. I don't necessarily see the heroes of the season, the villains of the seasons.
Sure.
People are becoming a little bit more ambiguous, and which I find to be great storytelling. Even kind of like
Absolutely.
if anyone's familiar with George R. R. Martin, or if you watch Game of Thrones, George R. R. Martin says, yeah, of course you have your heroes and your villains, but even your villains, if you kind of paint them really well, they do come off a little bit more ambiguous.
For example.
Exactly.
It's like Emily episode 1. It's like, holy shit, like there is the villain that we've all been craving since Shan. And now by the merge, Emily is like just definitively like probably the main protagonist of the season. I mean, it's crazy the turnaround she's had.
And that's the thing. A lot of people were saying that they were thinking she was going to be that villain archetype. But in the reality of it, she's human. And I love that. I love seeing, because there is a difference of like painting someone to be superhuman, like they've done in the past 4 seasons, where everyone has these sympathetic backstories and blah, 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 blah. It's fine. It's true. We all have our stuff in our life, but with her, they didn't need to have a sympathetic backstory. They painted her so well through the content that she is hands down my favorite character. And if someone would have told me that episode 1, I would have been like, no way, because I was not high on her episode 1.
Oh, I was high on her episode 1 just because I was one of those people that was craving a good villain. And I still am high on her because, again, like you said, she's just a fascinating, very multifaceted character.
Yeah.
All right. And one last note I have before we dive into like individual characters and everything. As you know, Casey, frankly, I kind of hated 44. Like, I don't want to say I hated it, but I will say out of the new era, that was definitively probably my least favorite, which I know isn't the most popular opinion. But it's like with 44, basically we had I felt like most of those characters were so one note. You know what I mean? Like Matt and Franny only ever talked about Matt and Franny. Danny was the goofball strategist, and he didn't really get any moments of actually being actively malicious, which isn't really his personality, but still, you know. And like arguably, I think Jamie Lynn of all people was probably the most three-dimensional character in that cast, which is kind of saying something, because really her edit wasn't that three-dimensional. It was mostly just throwing her under the bus. So and then, you know, it's like with 44, if you're not a fan of the Tika 3, which I like 2 out of 3 Tika 3 individually as characters. You know how I feel about Carson. But
that's how I was too, but I warmed up to him.
Right. But I don't think I ever did.
It's fair enough.
The bridge too far for me was when it was like, oh yeah, I studied these puzzles at home. By the way, thank you, Jeff Probst. Thank you, Jeff Probst, for fixing that shit. Like when Jeff said on the podcast, like, oh, that's awesome that Carson was able to do that. I got so worried that they were just gonna use that as an excuse to like never bring in new puzzles, and
yeah,
we were wrong. So by and large, essentially what I'm trying to say, you talked about the moral ambiguity. Like that's honestly why I like 43 a lot more than a lot of other people, because I feel like 43, it wasn't even really morally ambiguous. It was just a straight up dark season of Survivor. Whereas this, I feel like, is like the perfect middle ground, because there's nothing happening that's straight up like uncomfortable or like, you know, like real world kind of like this could, you know, fuck someone up. But there, like you said, it's like I strongly feel like practically every single person is both has shades of, you know, heroicism, and then also shades of, you know, just, I mean, it's very much a gradient of moral ambiguity this season, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they really are doing a great job of portraying through the edit every single character, because truly this is probably the first season in a while that I could say I'm halfway through and I have a grasp of everybody's personality. And the edit across the board has not had anyone necessarily dominate. I feel like the two people who have probably had the quote unquote most dominating edits was or is Emily and Caleb, but that's just due to the fact, literally, they have been to tribal council way more than anyone else. And so you have to spend time with those people. But other than that, I don't really feel
if I'm not mistaken, Austin and Drew are up there for confessional counts too. But again, it's kind of a similar situation where like I get the feeling like those two are going to be very pivotal to the post-merge dynamics, however they shake out. And you really need to set them up. So yeah, I agree. It's like the people that have gotten a little bit more screen time than some of the others, it makes sense. It's not just like, okay, we're going to have a season where Russell Hantz is on the season and he's just going to get fucking like 20 confessionals and everyone else is going to get like 1 or 2 per episode. It's not like that at all.
Which 100% goes back to the 90-minute time slot. Having that extra roughly 18 actual minutes of content allows you to explore other characters. Whereas in that 42-minute time slot, you kind of have to really pick and choose where's the entertainment and where's the story. But
especially
so
in a
much
3-tribe format.
Yeah, 100%. Now, also looking at the confessional count, because I just pulled it up on my computer. Okay. Yes, there are a handful of people who have had a lot more. Emily has the most by actually quite a bit, but everyone's averaging around the high teens. We have some people in the mid-20s, and then Emily and Caleb are at 36 and 37 at the highest.
Oh, damn. But like you said, there's clearly like a logical reason for that, given the first 3 episodes.
And once again, though, everyone else has had good content. The only person who even might be suffering from their confessionals is Sifu, but Sifu's a larger than life character. We're just kind of getting a lot of his extremes, but we still know him. We still know him.
I get the
we
feeling that Sifu actually sucks in confessionals, honestly. I get that feeling.
It's possible. We get his wild energy during camp, and at his confessionals, we get his sort of tunnel vision of, she voted for me, she's got to go. So we got his personality and we got his strategic side. So even so, I still know him as a character better than some of the other people in the previous seasons.
Is it fair to say that, and this is just going into Survivor statistics here, but is it fair to say that literally everyone who has made the merge currently has more confessionals than Natalie White had in her whole season?
I think that's very possible. I think that is very possible.
Right.
Which actually will lead to a very interesting thing once the season's done. I'm sure some people have followed along with the over-edit, under-edit of winners. That statistic that's out there and that formula. And so it'll be very interesting to see where they're going to fall in the scale. So I'm very interested in that.
Well, if you want to know my winner pick right now, I am honestly, like, just reading the edit, I would genuinely at this point be kind of surprised if Emily didn't win. But the only reason I'm saying that is because it very much feels like the whole story, and we are the Survivor storytellers, it's what we do, but it does genuinely feel like the story of the season is being told through her eyes. And that right there is the main reason why I would genuinely be kind of surprised if she didn't end up winning. But you never know. I mean, I feel like Shan was kind of the same way. You know what I mean? So you never know. Emily could very easily be like a surprise early merge boot or something like that, you know?
Yeah, which is totally possible. And even so, I would still say the way her edit's been going is totally justifiable. She's had this nice little metamorphosis, as Survivor used to say. But I think, like, once again, we're getting a pretty good edit across the board, but the people that actually stick out to me are Emily as a potential winner, Dee as a potential winner,
absolutely,
Drew, Austin, and Caleb, but I can't imagine Caleb's long for this world.
Caleb's screwed. Caleb's screwed.
He's too good, and he's not managing his threat level. But it is Survivor, and there's still the chance that he could make it through another episode. But based on the edit so far, those 5 have the closest thing to a winner's edit.
And let's face it, Caleb has a returnee spot just fucking locked in, like, no question.
Oh yeah, 100%. So let's get into the 6 vote outs so far. We don't have to dive into it too long because some of these people, it's pretty self-explanatory. So let's just kind of start off with Hannah, for instance. I think for the first episode, her edit made perfect sense. We saw her struggles and she quit. Now, I know there was some background information in regards to her quit, which I think you were saying it was the nicotine. I can't remember if they actually said anything in the
She did mention that on the show.
Okay, it must have been like a single line. I feel like I think it only
came out. I think it only came up like once in confessional, and then if I'm remembering correctly, maybe once during camp life, she was like, "Oh my god, I'm really craving a cigarette" or something like that.
Yeah.
I really loved I really loved Hannah and Brandon's bond in the first episode. That to me was what kind of like carried the Hannah stuff for me.
Yeah, it was sort of unexpected. I like the relationship that they had and the way that it was painted. And honestly, the first 2 episodes are like totally Brandon's, storyline, like of, he's weak, he's a liability, and that's that. And honestly, on a non-story related note, but it kind of gave us Emily longer,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's really funny. You know what it kind of reminds me of, actually, if Emily does go on to win, is it very much reminds me of the David versus Goliath situation where Nick was supposed to be the first person voted out, but then Pat Cusack got medically evacuated. Yeah. Very much shades of that.
Yeah, I totally can see that. It would be fantastic if that was also the story again, because I love Emily, but I'm also like, I like a lot of these people, so I'm fine with how it ends up. So yeah, Brandon and Hannah, easy enough to talk about. Let's talk about Sabaya, and I guess in relation to similar to Hannah
Really
and
quick
Brandon,
with
but
Brandon. Really quick with Brandon, I just want to mention one thing with Brandon is that like I did genuinely like the energy that Brandon brought to the game. He might be the single worst challenge competitor that the show has ever had, like bar none. But I really love how the dude never really gave into self-deprecation. Like I very much would. I mean, Casey, you know me. You know me. If I was in those sorts, I would be freaking the fuck out. So I give Brandon a lot of credit for. I mean, he did have the panic attack on the boat, which I have all the sympathy in the world for. I would be having a panic attack. But like generally speaking, I did really like how he conducted himself in his first two episodes. Like I feel like you can draw a lot of parallels to oh shit, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the guy's name. I think I compared my Prometheus game to his at some point. Jacob Derwin. Jacob Derwin.
from
I feel
Ghost
like people
Island.
could yeah, I think just because it's like a super fan who flamed out really early, second boot. But I think the difference between Jacob Derwin and Brandon is like Brandon was much more self-aware than Jacob Derwin ever was, and he was self-aware about the fact that he was not in a great position the whole time. And he just never did anything to really embarrass himself or rub anyone else the wrong way. And I really did appreciate the positive attitude that he brought to his tribe while he was there. So although I genuinely hope he never plays again for his own health, I don't know. I'd like to see him like maybe maybe on a show that's a little less physically demanding, because I do think he is a fun character. And honestly, I was a little bit relieved that he got voted out so early, just because he dominated the pregame stuff. And a lot of, like, for example, Jam Jam dominated the pregame of 44. And so because of that, like basically from episode 1, I was like, yeah, this fucker's winning. It's not even remotely not obvious for me from episode 1. But anyways.
Yeah, I didn't pick up the Jam Jam stuff till like halfway through the season, when they were definitely painting him in an undeserving light, better than what he probably deserved, at least. But that's a previous season. So let's move on to Sabaya and Sean. Kind of a similar situation with Sabaya and Sean as it is with Hannah and Brandon. Their fates are kind of linked in a way.
I was shocked that Sabaya went out as early as she did. She seemed like she was being set up as a major character. So that was like the first shocking boot of the season, I thought.
I mean, I agree, but I think, though, for the first leg of this season, she was painted perfectly. She was in good, and she was a very, very smart player. But we saw that, like, she was getting ahead of herself. And then we had that secondary storyline of Emily and Caleb that kind of came full swing, which is how we saw her story end. And it was fantastic. I was kind of sort of indifferent towards her the first like episode or two, but by the end I was like, oh, I really like her, and I love, like, this is how she's going out. Or even if she stayed in longer, I'd be fine with it. But her story, yet again, third character in a row, made perfect sense. You could see all the dominoes set up and how they fell.
And then with Sean, given the way that he went out, it makes perfect sense that his edit was crap the whole time.
Yeah. And the thing is that, like, I do feel like he did sort of have an under edit compared to the other 4, but even his quote unquote under edit was not.
It was still present. He was still present. Yeah.
But I will say, though, that like the end result doesn't make sense, because it really did feel like it came out of nowhere, which I think
it genuinely did come out of nowhere. Probst, I think, pretty much said himself on the podcast that it came out of nowhere.
And I heard a snippet of the podcast. I'm fairly certain that, like, I think Probst was saying he assumed he was going out, so he wanted to go out on his own way, because nothing makes sense about his boot. But they did it the best they could, creating his arc for something that really did come out of nowhere. There's nothing in his confessionals that would even hint he would be doing this.
I would say the only thing is that literally the first line we hear from him is the whole like I'm on a personal journey type thing, and that like it seemed like and the Survivor discourse very much has been like, let's get rid of these personal journeys. Like, yeah, of course you're on a personal journey if you're on Survivor, but it's a fucking game for $1 million. So let's like, let's not make that like the sole focus.
Yeah. Which they've also been pretty good this season editing the like out the personal journey sob story stuff. We have had two of them, which we'll touch on in a minute, but let's talk about Brando and Jay. So at least for me, for Brando, he's present. I know who he is. I understand his relationship with Kendra and the interesting dynamics that they painted about that specific tribe of Bello 2.0.
I wish we would have seen Brando. I'm sorry. I wish we would have seen Brando go to Tribal Council and Bello 1.0 because I think he was in a very interesting position, and him and Kelly being the swing votes on that tribe was like the most engaged I was with him during the season.
Kelly?
Yeah, he was the swing with Kelly, and on the original Bello, it was because Katurah and Kendra.
I'm so sorry. I'm thinking we're talking about Bello 2.0. I'm like, what? No, I totally understand. I mean, that's the thing.
Bello 1.0.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, that was a very interesting thing. They actually showed him at a really good spot for the original tribes. But then, like, I guess you can only do so much when it's just like a 2v2 and one in the middle. But I still like got a good grasp of who he was because he does come off as pretty intelligent. And I feel like they were kind of painting him as a strategist type. But we had that very interesting scene of the Brando and Drew dynamic where Drew's just like, nah, I'm not about that alliance.
That was
which is like that also just shatters Drew being the superfan archetype. You don't dismiss an alliance. That is incredibly stupid. But I feel like that was probably like his last potential high point that they had for him.
And I see what you're saying, though. It's like because it like basically just based on the circumstances, there wasn't really a ton of story content from him personally.
Yeah.
For me, I just didn't really like his personality was honestly a little bit flat for me. I don't know, but again, that could just come down to like we didn't really see a lot of him.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't even really call him a casting dud, but I do think when it comes down to it, he is probably going to be the least memorable player from this season for me personally.
Probably the least memorable, but I think I'll still even remember him. I just think, they couldn't do too much more with his story because had the randomness of Tribe Swap shaken out to be different, he would have been in probably a much favorable position to have also gone much further in the game. So there's only so much you can do. You're not going to spend a ton of time showing him being in an amazing position when it doesn't pan out to be anything. So that's unfortunate for Brando, but they still did yet again, 5 people in a row. Great job showing us their story. So the last person that we have to talk about is Jay, who I think has been, in my mind, her arc is so heartbreaking because they paint her as a pretty sympathetic person, and thinks she's in an alliance and she's taking one for the team by the whole Sifu thing. And you see her allies completely disregard her from the very beginning, pretty much. And then ultimately they want to get rid of her. And she is the casualty of the first ever successful shot in the dark. We've had 2 safe shot in the darks before, but the first ever successful one.
Which, holy shit, what a moment, dude. Like, what a moment.
And it's like, I was so happy for Caleb in that moment. But once again, she's the sympathetic character. And it's so heartbreaking because just seeing her complete and utter devastation.
Oh, totally.
Has got to be so painful. I can't imagine what I think
she made a pretty noble attempt in the situation that she was in to try to flip the votes to Emily in that circumstance. Yeah. And honestly, as much as I love Emily, I was very much rooting for that to happen, especially because if Emily would have gone there, it would have had a couple implications. Mostly it would have been like my winner pick would have been out the window. And I always kind of love when that happens because it's like, okay, shit, the game's wide open. But also, could you imagine the dramatic irony of Emily being the one to tell Caleb to use the shot in the dark and then her being the casualty of it? That would have been delicious. So I was really rooting for her to swing the votes to Emily. And I do think she was being as proactive about that as she possibly could have been given the circumstances. So I give her credit there. She definitely went out fighting.
Yeah, as much as she could. But yeah, once again, I mean, her arc is just so devastating. And like, I watched Survivor this week with my brother, and I was so conflicted on who to root for, Emily, Caleb, or Jay. I mean, Emily's my favorite, and I love Caleb. I think he is a great player. And then I'm just devastated the whole time. I feel so bad. And just seeing the look of defeat on her face, like, I can't even imagine what it is like for her to watch this whole season back, not only to see.
Oh yeah, for sure,
Not only to see this whole time her tribe mates didn't really care for her, but then also to see her go out like this. My heart goes out for her. I can't imagine the last time I feel like Jessica Lewis, maybe.
Right. I feel like that's like I feel like that's a really underappreciated element of the mental toll that Survivor takes on you, is the actual component of watching the episodes back. Because that hit me pretty hard. And I didn't even really have a ton of content. But the one thing that did hit me really hard was when I was out there, when I was playing, I was like, okay, this Joe kid, he seems like someone who I would totally want to align with. He's a theater nerd. Like, I feel like I get along really well with him. And then, of course, the episode after I get voted out, you put in that Joe confessional. Tiki got voted out, and frankly, good. He seemed chaotic. I'm like, no, Joe, no. That genuinely broke my heart, Casey, and I never even actually interacted with him the whole season.
Yeah, but I mean, he was saying it purely based on the chaoticness that he thought you were going to bring to the game. But
which I really wasn't. That's the ironic thing.
Yeah.
Like, for that game in particular, I was very much trying to just be a team player.
Yeah.
But I digress. Frankly, I don't even really know where he got the idea that I was all chaotic. Unless
I think you were just very, very high on energy. But
because of the two triple shots.
Yeah. But anyway. So going back to this season of Survivor, I mean, I think we've already covered a couple of the things. So the last thing that I kind of want to bring up is just, what are some of the lingering storylines that you feel is still in this game? I think the number one thing that jumps out to me is the amazing setup of Caleb and Emily as this duo. We have seen it now in at least 3 of the 6 episodes in how they're saving each other. They are 2 people who I would love to see at the end together, or at least
that's never going to happen. That's never going to happen.
I know it's not. But I would love to see it because it's
yeah.
But it's just like their storyline potentially is going to end in devastation for one of them.
Oh, absolutely. And I am more than willing to predict that it's going to end with Emily backstabbing Caleb. That is my prediction. But we will see.
Interesting.
Just because I feel like Emily has a lot more options moving forward than Caleb does.
Especially without Caleb.
Right. And I feel like Caleb, I mean, it's like, don't get me wrong, I'm stoked that he survived this last episode. But honestly, the way that he survived that shot in the dark thing, I mean, that is like a season defining move right there. I mean, that's like fucking like the Jesse Cody vote out, but like in the final 13, you know what I mean? It's like, there is no way that Caleb is just not going to be the biggest target on the board every single week until he gets voted out. I just cannot foresee that happening. And so because of that, because she's already very much in good with Austin and Drew, and I love that little threesome, by the way. Yeah, I'm definitely thinking that we're going to get an episode very soon. And she's going to be tearful about it. Don't get me wrong. She's going to be emotional about it. It's not like it's going to be like, I'm going to stab Caleb in the back. Ha, 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 ha. It's more so going to be like, I have a lot more options moving forward in this game if Caleb is not, attached to my side.
Yeah, which I think if something like that does happen and we see her get emotional, it'd be very interesting to have that sort of juxtaposition of the more cold, emotionless Emily that was in the beginning and how she turned out to be the way she turned out.
Oh, totally, totally. Also, I'm very invested in Sandwichgate, as
Which
you know.
it's so funny. Like I very much enjoy this little side quest, side storyline, B storyline, whatever you want to refer to it as. But I kind of hope it doesn't last too long. It actually really gives me for anyone.
What will Austin talk about then?
Hopefully strategy. That's what I like.
Fair enough.
But no, I mean it's funny. It's such great comic relief for this little B storyline. But it for anyone who watches Friends out there, it really gives me Ross vibes of there's the storyline in the latter season of Friends where he's like, my sandwich, and then he has to go to that's what this is giving me is Ross vibes right now. So I absolutely love it.
Obviously, Katura and Bruce, that's a major thing.
Yes.
For me, one of the funniest edits in all of the history of Survivor is that shot, like after Bruce does that fake out with the flint, and then we cut to a confessional of Katura, and she doesn't even have words. She just has the facial expression. I'm just like, that is such a perfect editing beat right there. Like that was just a chef's kiss of an editing beat. I love that so much.
I 100% agree. Everything about this almost one-sided conflict is absolutely fantastic. And I mean,
Bruce cares way more about Caleb than he does about Katura at this point.
Bruce cares more about almost everything else rather than
right.
But the thing is I really am, for as much time as they have spent on it, I'm really hoping this storyline almost ends in a Zeke versus David fashion. Like, like this is it. This is the final battle. One of us are leaving this episode, and it has to be one of us.
To use another comparison, it kind of gives me Josh and Jeremy vibes a little bit.
Josh and Jeremy.
From San Juan del Sur.
I can't actually recall that storyline offhand.
Josh Reed, Jeremy Collins, they were like on opposing tribes.
I remember Jeremy, but I can't remember Josh at the moment. But
yeah, okay, it's all good.
But sorry, my bad.
No problem.
But no, I'm loving this storyline. I think this is probably one of the most clear storylines that we have seen from the very beginning. And it honestly has delivered some very comical edits, but also delivers like an air of seriousness of like, okay, like how is no one else picking up on these things? But the thing is people do pick up on it, and it's not, people are aware, but hopefully they don't let it go too long.
And then another storyline that I am definitely focused on, that I think the show is also focused on, and I wouldn't be surprised if like a majority of these players make it to the end game, given the focus in the edit, is the 4-person Reba alliance that we've had since episode 1. Austin, Drew, Dee, and Julie. I think that those 4 are all, like, honestly, and I think we've been talking about this for in our coverage of 44, where it's like 44, like obviously you had the Tika 3, but you didn't really have like a lot of like alliances. And I think those 4 are a very fascinating group, because you got like that Steven JT combo with Drew and Austin, but then you've also got Dee and Julie, who I might like even better than Drew and Austin as a duo, because I think Dee is like a really unique character. She's I don't want to just put her in the Abby Maria camp just because of her nationality, but but she's very much kind of like if Abby Maria actually knew how to hold her temper, what I mean? And then I love Julie is someone where it's like, Julie kind of reminds me of if they actually bothered to give Heather from 41 an edit. And it's just so refreshing that a character like that is actually consistently getting confessionals. That's all I'll say.
She does have that, like, which once again, I don't quite think the archetypes are very present here, but she does almost have that sort of mom archetype. It is that character. But the very interesting thing is that we can see the dynamics rather than just being, I'm the mom of the group. It's something they touch upon for like one episode. So it shows that she has transcended that sort of archetype.
I feel like she's definitely in the Tina Wesson mold, where it's like Tina is obviously a mother, but I feel like, much like Julie, I feel like Tina's character transcends just being the tribe mother. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's honestly one of my favorite character types, is just like the person that's like sweet and kindly on the outside, but they'll stab you in the back. And that's very much Julie's vibe. Like,
yeah.
So yeah, I'm definitely rooting for Julie as like a dark horse. I think she's one of the dark horses in this thing.
And you know what? Speaking of this whole storyline you brought up of like the Reba 4, like I could see a scenario in which pretty much the four of them are like right towards the end of the game. And then it wouldn't surprise me if at least
like three of them. It wouldn't surprise me if at least three of them made the top 5. I'll say that.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised either. And hell, it'd be very interesting to see this tight 4 fight each other towards the end of the game. Because once again, you have the 4, then you have the duos, within the 4.
I think as far as like, there's definitely some cannon fodder in the cast. I mean, again, all the characters are developed, but like, frankly, I would be shocked if Sifu didn't go in the next couple episodes. I just think his story is pretty much, done at this point.
There wasn't a ton of story. It's once again, we see the two sides, and we see his camp life, his wild personality. And then we see the like behind the scenes of his tunnel vision for Jay, which is now completely over.
Exactly.
So what more is he serving to the story? Now, Jeff claims there is, I think he said it last season on his pod. Yes, he 100% because he just started the podcast last season. He claimed last season, after like his 3rd podcast, there is no such thing as a winner's edit, which is the most ridiculous. Bullshit. It's the most ridiculous thing, because
bullshit.
You need to have a winner's edit to tell you why that winner won the game. So, but that aside, yeah, I mean, I think that's it for Sifu. I think the only other storyline, and then I actually don't really have anything more to touch upon for this podcast. The last little storyline that I have is one of the few times we actually got a sympathetic backstory was Jake. And I'm actually fine with it.
Jake's a really interesting character. Yeah.
Yeah. I got to say, the Boston accent sometimes completely takes me out of it. But I actually like totally feel for him. I feel completely sympathetic, and I'm still feeling potential vibes that he could get medevaced, which would be very unfortunate. We could have a situation like we had, it was either last season or 2 seasons ago, where they get medevaced, but there's still like a presence in the game. But I feel like that's Jake's primary storyline, is this medical issues, and I don't really know what more is going to happen with him.
I feel ya. I think one of the interesting things with Jake is that he hasn't, like you said, it's all been focused on his medical stuff, but he has been building bonds though. Like, I think low key, I have been seeing, like for example, Katura basically tried to start a rivalry with him in episode 1, and it really didn't go anywhere. But I do like that scene though. The whole like, so is it hard to be a lawyer? Like, I'm very interested to see where the Kendra and Jake dynamic goes. That to me is one of the more fascinating dynamics in the game. And again, I think Kendra is like, she is shaping up to be like an Eliza Orlins level. I'm not saying she's an Eliza Orlins level confessionalist, because she's definitely not, but she is absolutely an Eliza Orlins caliber, like, GIF machine at the very least. Like, I cannot believe the facial reactions on that woman.
I mean, she's really bringing the entertainment, though.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So and again, I think I said this before on this episode, but like Kendra strikes me as the type of character where it's like, really, if you look at her position in the game, it's like there's not really, she doesn't have her hands in like a lot of things. And I feel like if this was another season, if it wasn't 90 minutes, I feel like her edit would be a lot more muted than it was. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, I think totally. The 90 minutes really is a game changer, which I'm curious to see how that also translates to like the Amazing Race. Not to get off topic, I haven't started the season yet, but yeah, the 90 minutes is a game changer, and I think honestly, this should have been the thing like years ago.
This basically should have been like the reset in 41, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hell, it should. There was rumors that Winners at War was going to have 2-hour episodes back in the day.
2 hours almost might feel like a little too much, but Winners at
Like
War,
too
if you were
much.
going to do
Winners
90
at War,
minutes,
I feel like would have justified it though.
yeah, and I think
I don't know. I'm not huge on Winners at War. I have a similar issue with Winners at War than I do with Heroes versus Villains, which is basically that one character kind of came and steamrolled through everything, and so you don't really get. I don't know. I really don't like where like the people that ended up making the end game on that season. I felt like it was a very unsatisfying group of people, with the obvious exception of Tony. I mean, don't get me wrong. Tony as the other 2-time winner is about the most perfect outcome you could have asked for.
yeah.
But I just don't like the road that we took to get there. I feel like a lot of people just kind of like, based on the edit at least, a lot of people just kind of rolled over and gave up.
Fair enough. I mean, with Tony though, I love his journey, and it's not only a journey that you see edited throughout that season, but it's also the journey of 3 seasons to get to him winning Winners at War.
Sure,
but anyway, do you have any final thoughts before we conclude this?
Final thoughts. I mean, well, what do you think of Kelly, just out of curiosity? Because we haven't gone to her yet, and I do think she is another. I feel like if this was like a more old school era of Survivor, she would have a borderline perfect winners edit. Because to me, I feel like Kelly has like the textbook, like Michelle Fitzgerald edit, where it's not like she's the most dynamic character on the cast by any stretch, but every episode they are very much taking the time to make sure that we know where her head's at.
Yeah.
So once again, it's like, even though Kelly, I would say out of the 12 left in the merge, she is definitely like, I don't want to call her boring because she's not boring, but she's the most
I don't
normal.
think so. Yeah.
Well, I'm saying she's the most normal person out of the merge people.
I mean, what I have to say about Kelly is that I think, yeah, you're right. We have always had check-ins with Kelly. We saw the very interesting dynamics of her and her tribe in the first couple episodes. But what I honestly feel like is going on with Kelly is I feel like Kelly is going to stay present because she'll be relevant in the final stretch of the game.
Okay.
That's what I'm getting from her. I really actually would have loved to have seen where her loyalties would have lied if they had gone to tribal in the beginning. But that's what I'm thinking about her. I think she's going to kind of be like a sleeper hit towards the end of the game.
Sure. But yeah, I mean, I know I have and it's not like we need to talk about every single person. I think we've talked about every person at least a little bit.
I think we have touched upon every person, yeah.
So yeah, I mean, like, again, it's just like, it's so refreshing. And I felt this in David versus Goliath. I felt this in 42, but I don't often feel it where going into the merge, you genuinely are rooting for every single damn person. And if you're not rooting for them, you at least are compelled by them. And I mean, like I said, I think it's just a lucky combination of the 90-minute episodes, the fact that I do think Survivor is getting a little bit more skilled with, making sure people have a more even amount of screen time. Like, honestly, I feel like That's kind of why I didn't like 44 is because I felt like 44, it was kind of like almost like a revert back to like, okay, now it's the Carolyn and Carson and Jam Jam show.
I mean, it was a very lopsided edit, but I also,
Yeah.
in a weird way, sort of understand why the edit was what it was.
Yeah, I just didn't like that result, honestly. But what I'm saying is that it's so nice that, we actually have this post merge where everyone on the board is a factor. There is nobody there that's just kind of like coasting. And I'm very excited to see how it all plays out.
Yeah, me too. All right. Well, I guess on that note, thank you for those who have tuned in for the first episode of the third iteration of the Survivor Storytellers. Hopefully, we'll be back in a few episodes when we can kind of figure out what the hell Survivor is doing with this weird double boot next episode, having 12 people left.
Yeah.
But, that is that. So hopefully we'll be back in a few more episodes, and then we'll also be back after the finale. So thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Have a good night.
See y'all later.